You know, when a plane crashes or a huge company collapses, our first instinct is to look at the person at the controls. But what if that's the wrong place to look? What if the real failure happened years earlier, in a place we never even thought to check? That's what we're digging into in this explainer, the silent, hidden causes behind some of the biggest disasters we've seen.
So let's just get right to it with a big question. Where do disasters really begin? When you hear about a major incident, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's a pretty clear and pretty specific picture.
And that picture is usually what you'd call the common story. You know, a mistake in the cockpit, an error on the ramp, something immediate, something visible. But the hidden story? Oh, that's something else entirely. The real failure didn't start with a bang. It began with a whisper, years earlier, in the boardroom.
Okay, let's dive right into that, because this brings us to our main subject, the silent culprit. We're about to unmask the real source of the kind of risk that can bring down entire systems. And trust me, it's probably not what you're expecting. This silent culprit has a name, governance failure. And before you think that means some big, dramatic, movie-style bad decision, it's not. It's actually way quieter. Think of it more like a slow decay of discipline. It's the quiet, gradual acceptance of little risks, day after day, that just pile up, completely unseen over time.
So, what does this slow decay actually look like day to day? Honestly, it's kind of boring. It's the small compromises that seem perfectly reasonable at the time. It's putting off that big investment in safety or maintenance. It's those assumptions that everybody just nods along with that nobody ever questions. It's that quiet acceptance of just a little more risk every single day.
But here's the thing, it's not random. These failures follow very specific patterns. So let's look at 5 common blueprints for failure. These are the recurring ways that organizations quietly, almost invisibly, slide into crisis. Yep, 5 key patterns. You'll see these pop up again and again in almost every major governance meltdown. Let's break them down one by one.
Okay, pattern number 1 is something called board capture. This is a huge one. It's when the board, the very group of people whose entire job is to provide oversight and ask tough questions, loses its independence.
And when that happens, the board stops working for the good of the organization. Instead, it starts serving other interests, political goals, or maybe just one big shareholder, or even just personal friendships. The focus shifts from long-term health to short-term wins. And here's the killer. The critical challenge disappears. Big decisions get waved through, but they never really get stress tested.
And that leads us right into our second pattern, rubber stamping management. It makes sense, right? A board that's been captured isn't really a board anymore. It becomes little more than a rubber stamp for whatever the management team wants to do. So when you have a rubber stamp board, management proposals aren't challenged, big plans aren't stress tested, and no one is there to ask that simple, vital question, and then what? And that's when something really dangerous happens. That feeling of, we got this, we know what we're doing, that operational confidence, it completely takes over and pushes out the hard discipline of good governance.
All right, pattern number 3. This is where a tool that's supposed to create accountability gets totally flipped on its head. We're talking about the annual general meeting, or the AGM, where shareholders are supposed to get their say. Well, instead of being a force for stability, it gets weaponized as a pressure tool.
So, instead of looking out for the long-term health of the company, a weaponized AGM can force it to pull out cash for dividends, instead of, say, reinvesting in safety upgrades. It can be used to block crucial funding for security, or to politicize who gets hired for top jobs. The entire focus just shifts away from long-term resilience to short-term survival.
Now, pattern number 4 is really subtle, and that's what makes it so dangerous. This is when a company's complicated corporate structure isn't used to manage risk, it's used to hide it.
So how can you spot this? Well, you see major safety problems getting buried in some subsidiary with no clear way for that bad news to travel up to the top. You'll see totally different standards in different parts of the same company. The brand might scream, safety is our #1 priority, but the legal structure tells a completely different story. The risk doesn't just vanish, it just festers in the dark.
And when risk gets hidden away like that, it leads us straight to our 5th and final pattern, and this one might just be the most dangerous of all. This is when safety and security stop being something you do and become something you just file a report about.
Yeah, this is that world of perfect-looking dashboards where every single light is green. Bad news? It never makes it to the boardroom. Cold, hard KPIs replace the gut feelings and expert judgment of the people actually doing the work. And the single most terrifying sign of all?
Silence is mistaken for stability. So you take all 5 of these patterns, and what do you get? You get a powerful and incredibly dangerous illusion of control. You get this huge gap, this chasm between what the people in the boardroom think is going on and the reality on the front line. It's like there are 2 different realities coexisting in the same company. Up in the boardroom, the reports say everything's compliant, the metrics are all trending up, the KPIs are green across the board, everything looks perfectly stable. Meanwhile, down on the ground, people are using workarounds to get the job done, the official procedures are hopelessly out of date, and the entire system is creaking under the strain.
And eventually, that gap becomes too big to ignore. The illusion shatters, and when it does, that's when you see the headlines. The costs suddenly become very real. Catastrophic safety incidents, major security breaches, regulators stepping in, and of course, a complete and total loss of public trust.
But here's the good news, it doesn't have to end that way. The real key is learning how to read the warning signs while they're still quiet. So for this last part, let's talk about how you can spot these alarms before they start screaming.
So here they are. These are the big governance alarms to listen for. 1. Directors stop asking the hard questions. 2. The management reports start looking exactly the same month after month. 3. Safety discussions always get shoved to the very end of the agenda. And a huge one, when you hear people using complexity as an excuse, or worse, that classic phrase, well, that's just how we've always done it.
And this all leads us to the single most important idea in this entire explainer. I really want this to land. Operational failures are almost always the last symptom of governance failure. That disaster you see on the news, that's just the final, loud result of a long, quiet process of decay that probably started years ago.
So yeah, governance failure is silent, right up until the moment it isn't. Everyone focuses on the fingerprints on the controls at the moment of disaster. But the real story, the one that matters, is written in the boring meeting minutes from 5 years earlier. So the question we should be asking isn't who made the final error, it's who let the system get so fragile in the first place. Now that we've seen what can go wrong, we'll get into what good governance actually looks like next time.